Welcome to Beyond the Pod, presented by SodaStick.com.
Brunette, he moves, Brunette back in, he scores! Minnesota has upset the Colorado Avalanche! Andrew Brunette, the game-winning goal!
Here are your hosts, the second greatest scorer in Gopher hockey history, Pat Micheletti, and the second greatest hockey analyst on this podcast, Brandon Mileski.
All right, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Pod, brought to you by SodaStick.com. I'm Brandon Mileski, Pat Micheletti with me. Pat, great to talk to you. I know you're up on the shores of Lake Superior, enjoying a little R&R right now.
Yes, very relaxing. Didn't know what relaxation was until you get up north. Yeah, it's beautiful.
And then I'm going to ruin it by having you talk to me on a podcast while you could be out looking at the ocean and the waves, or not the ocean, the lake and the waves, right? It's basically an ocean.
Lake, yeah. Yep, but hey, not a problem. Love it.
All right, we are guestless today, and Pat, I just thought we have so much that we can get to with off season now officially starting after last night's Stanley Cup victory for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Before we talk a lot of Minnesota Wild stuff, which I think is available for us to chat about, the Lightning win last night. Not a very competitive series overall. They win 4-1 last night, 1-0. Goaltending outstanding on both sides. But you look at that Lightning team, Pat, 2-3 years ago, the Lightning were the team that every year I would pick them to win the Cup, and they'd get to a conference final and not be able to finally push through. And
right,
maybe they're just good when you're not doing 82-game regular seasons, because last year got cut off, and then they ended up winning the thing in August and September, and this year you had the shortened season. Maybe they were just built for a shorter season.
Well, with the talent that they have. Right. I mean, there's relevance to that, the talent that they have. And when that talent is healthy going into the playoffs, because usually, Brandon, at the end of a year, guys are banged up. They're tired, especially mentally. And I mean, look at Kucherov, right? Didn't play all year. People are complaining, whatever. But the point being, he was 100% healthy, 80, 90%, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how bad his hip was. But the point is, he was ready to go. It was like, the start of the season for him. And you had a guy like that to your lineup. Their talent up, from their best top player to their fourth line right winger. They're just that good.
Do you think Kucherov is a bit underrated? I think people that are really deep into hockey know how great he is, but he doesn't get a lot of the recognition. And part of it is he's on a really good team that has a lot of depth, right? There's a lot surrounding him. But you watch him play in a playoff game, and he'll just get 2-3 points relatively easily. And he's a top 5 player in this league.
Oh yeah, some may think he might be the best player. Yeah, I mean, he's at another level, but he plays with Braden Point, right? And I always talk about chemistry with your line mates, whatever. They remind me at times of the old Russian teams, the Makarov, all those guys. And granted, Kucherov is Russian, but you know what I mean. Just they always know where the other player is going to be, and they always fill a lane. They're always moving. They always have their head up, and they just are just it's a machine. And he is something else.
I saw a tweet that I found pretty interesting after last night's victory. Was the tweet basically said, when the Lightning drafted Steven Stamkos #1 overall in the draft, little did they know at that time that later on he would be the 5th best player on your Stanley Cup winning team, right? Because you got Kucherov, you've got Hedman, Point, Vasilevsky. I mean, you've got a #1 overall pick who is destined to become a superstar and has had a pretty good career. That's your 5th best player.
Yeah. And I mean, and
the way McDonough played in that series.
and think about it. They won last year. I mean, Stamkos ended up playing 1 game in the Stanley Cup Finals, right? Because it was injury.
Scored a goal.
Yeah, he did. And then that was it. But Um, it's amazing what and how they do it. I mean, how do they do it? We look at it and say, well, why can't we do it? Their management team, and Tom Curvers, our good friend, was a part of that for a lot of years. They just were masterful at managing the camp, finding the right players, and they're going to be, if you look at their roster and their ages, they're going to be good they're set for the next 4 or 5 years.
They do have more cap issues on the horizon, but we thought that the last 2 years and they were able to overcome them and manage it and won 2 cups.
Yeah, but are they going to be upset losing a Tyler Johnson at $5.5 million? Yeah. He was.
They can overcome that.
Yeah. They can overcome that, and they can probably find a guy for $1 million or $2 million that can do what Tyler Johnson did at 5.5 on a fourth line.
Well, when you talk about the goalie Vasilevsky, Pat,
and I have a question for you on that too. By the way, I'm going to stop you right there before you get. A person DM'd me last night and said, "Would you trade Kaprizov?
Oh boy,
for Vasilevsky?"
Yeah.
Now, and I'm asking you that, and you don't have to answer, but you brought up a good point last week about all of the teams that were left, and there were 4 of them at the time, and they spent all their money on their goaltending. Well, who won the Vezina? That's Conn Smythe. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's credence to that.
Well, and until these last 2 years, Pat, evidence would show that spending a lot of money and committing a good chunk of your salary cap towards your goalie is not a very prudent thing to do. But I think Vasilevsky, if you can get that elite of a goaltender, can change your mind on it, because the guy is clearly a playoff proven performer here. I mean, how many times has he had shutouts in situations in which you're clinching series, clinching cups? And we've talked many times over the years about this Wild team, Pat, about a goalie playing at that level and the confidence that spreads throughout the team and changes the way players play in front of him. I mean, heck, even the way Parise played Montreal.
Oh, he was phenomenal.
I mean, that team might not make the playoffs next year.
And this is not laughable, and this is nothing. You don't take anything away from Cam Talbot for what he did this year, but Carey Price in the net for Minnesota, they may have gotten to the Cup. They may have.
Sure.
I mean
that Montreal team beat Vegas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And think about this, Brandon. We'll go back to a normal year next year. We hope, we think.
Yeah.
Montreal may not even make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I mean, they with the division that they're in, and it may be it might be tough.
They just went on a really, really good playoff run,
right.
Which is the beauty of the sport. It's the beauty of the game is you get in the playoffs, you think you always have a chance.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about our team there in Minnesota Wild, because they made a bunch of moves over the past week since I talked to you last. Eriksson Ek signs an 8-year, $42.5 million deal. So from an AAB standpoint, he's going to be a $5.25 million hit over the salary cap over the next 8 years. I think most people I've seen, and I'm judging off of social media, which is not the best way to approach these things, but I think most people think this is a pretty fair contract for both sides. Pat, anytime it's an 8-year deal, I get why people are concerned, because there's always risk.
Yeah.
Anytime you sign a guy to an 8-year deal, there's risk there.
Yep.
That being said, with Eriksson Ek, I don't think there's a ton of risk. Just because I think his floor is pretty high, because I think it's pretty clear he's going to be an elite defensive center for you throughout the entirety of that 8-year deal contract. Do I expect him to score at the rate he did this past season? No. But I also don't think he's going to be reverting to form offensively 2-3 years ago. I think he's a guy who's going to be able to chip in nearly 20 goals a season. And when you combine that with the defensive effort, the back end of this contract, you might, especially if the salary cap goes up, the Wild could be getting a steal here.
That was my next point. I think in 3 years, because the cap will probably go up, after next year. And, what are the expectations for him? For me, if he got to 20 again next year, great. But if he got to 50, 15, I'm fine with that because of all the other things that he does. Secondly, really good person, not a pain in the you know what, and he's safe. You can trust him. In any situation, you can't look at him and say, "Oh boy, he only got 35 points," or whatever the case may be. And he's young enough where by the time that contract ends, he'll still be making less than Mikko Koivu made at the end of his career.
Yeah.
And so I'm all in on the contract.
Well, and to your point, Pat, about him being safe, he doesn't come across as a guy that, hey, I signed a big deal, I'm going to get fat and happy and not work as hard, right? I mean, they literally dub him Mr. September in the locker room because when they show up for training camp, he is in perfect shape. He runs the killers better than anybody.
Yep.
Really, the one concern I have, Pat, is over an 8-year deal. A guy like him who, let's face it, he's not like a pure finesse player. He's not like a pure skill player that's going to shy away from contact. Is it possible there are injuries with him at some point because he plays a pretty physical game and a pretty demanding game? Sure, the body could wear down. But to your point, he's 24 now. You're getting the prime of his career. You're not paying him when he's 35, 36 years old. And the other part of that too, Pat, is he had some injuries pop up in the playoffs where it looked like he was going to be out for the rest of the series, and he battles through it. So I also have confidence that this guy's going to be a warrior for your team.
Yep. Yep. And we talk about what Guerin's trying to do is get the right guys. And you know what? Billy thinks that he's one of those guys that they are going to win a cup with. And, where will he slot in 2 or 3 years? You know what? He may have to play a second line role next year. We just don't know. But eventually he'll be that third line guy. And, if you get him running a third line, and he'll be a little bit older, a little bit even more mature, and probably a better player than he is now. That's what you're looking for.
I was just going to talk about his role, Pat, because I think there are people that clamoring for him to, hey, let's elevate him up in the line and give him a chance to play with a Kaprizov or a Fiala or whoever is in your top 6 when the season starts. And, maybe Pat, maybe he gets to that point eventually and his game keeps growing. We've seen plenty of growth with him in the last 2 years. So there is reason to believe that, he's always had a relatively good shot and clearly has, I think, proven a nose for the net and can get those kind of dirty rebound type goals. But the way the roster was constructed last year, and let's face it, it's going to be different next year and it'll be different 3-4 years from now. But the way it was constructed, you mentioned chemistry earlier in this podcast. He has chemistry with Marcus Foligno.
Yes.
He has chemistry with Jordan Greenway, or, let's say Greenway gets traded or you lose him in an expansion draft. If it's a Ryan Hartman, like he fits well with those straight line, get the puck in deep, get in hard and go to work type of players and get to the net type of line mates. So I'm not one of those that says, well, you pay him now, let's give him a chance to elevate him. Well, he's proven he has good chemistry with those guys.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to stay with those guys.
Yeah. And I don't think his role, because he signed a new deal, has to change. That's why they paid him, because he's really, really good and better than anyone else in the role that he plays. Right.
Yep.
Now he's not gonna be your Kaprizov, right? He's not gonna be the dynamic, goal scoring, point producing type of player. But Kaprizov is not going to be Eriksson Ek, that, as you mentioned, straight line, hard nose, get in your face, get those, chip in offensively, be really, really good defensively, kill penalties, that type of player. He's slotted where he is, and that's a hole you don't have to worry about.
Not surprising to me that Eriksson Ek was the first of the main 3 that we were hoping to get signed this offseason. He seemed like from the get-go that was going to be the easiest. We've talked plenty about the Kaprizov contract, Pat. We really haven't talked about the Fiala contract.
I'm worried.
And, let's face it, the guy's had 2 pretty good years, 2 dynamic years, and he's going to want money, and he should get money. Whether you think he's elite star player type of guy and should be getting that kind of money, I guess that's up for debate, and that's kind of the situation the Wild are in now is, well, where do we slot this guy exactly in terms of how much money and how many years we give him?
Well, and here's my thinking. My thinking is Fiala's agent is saying, let's wait until Kaprizov gets done, and then we can set the market there. The Wild would probably like to get him done and then move on to Kaprizov. I think they know the dollars that they're going to spend. They know how much they have. They can't go over. And, so I think, it's going to be a cat and mouse game with Fiala for a while. I really do. If let's say Fiala signs for $6 million, right? And Kaprizov ends up at 9. Fiala might be saying, well, wait a second, I do as much as Kaprizov, blah, 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 blah. He's getting 3 million more. And, but the big fish is really Kaprizov, right? I mean,
Yep.
He's the big fish.
Yep.
So I bet there's a waiting game going on. And,
well, I think the Wild might be willing to wait because I think if they are going to acquire a center by a trade, I think Fiala, just from a financial standpoint and a salary standpoint, and maybe the Wild don't want to go all in on him and pay him this contract that's just way too many years. And it's not like Eriksson Ek, where you mentioned he's Eriksson Ek safe. Fiala is still a little unsafe. You don't know what you're going to get from a year-to-year basis.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you this question. And I'm not looking for a what would you do, but here's a thought. I think a big potential X factor is Matt Dumba, because you got $6 million, but they're paying him $7 million next year, $7 million. So $6 million off the cap, right?
Yep.
So if that money, do you keep your defenseman, or do you trade Fiala for a center, right? Maybe not, a center in the $3 to $4 million range. Where do you make your team better? Are you better, or can you pay Fiala more and keep him if you trade a Matt Dumba, for whatever, or let him go, or whatever the case may be?
Well, it's hard because with Fiala, I feel like there's a wide range of salary numbers and a wide range of how many years you're going to have to pay him for. So it's hard to answer that question with Fiala. I mean, if you look at Fiala, I look at him as a $7 million player. I mean, I don't want to get anywhere north of 7.5 necessarily.
So that would put them at it. Let's say they paid him 7. They pay
Kaprizov
9.
They might get 9.
That gives you $1.5 million left.
Well, I think you might be over the cap at that point, but I mean,
I thought they had about 17. Maybe I'm wrong. I
thought they were in like the 16.5 range. They just signed Nick Bjugstad, who I was going to get to, for a year at $900,000. I think at some point they've got to shed salary somewhere, regardless. So that's why I know people are hesitant to lose Matt Dumba, but I've always said I would expose Matt Dumba in the expansion draft, and if he's gone, ideally I would have liked to have gotten something for him, but that $6 million in cap savings is huge for this team. And we'll get to a different way they could save money on the cap here in a second. But Pat, let me talk to you about our sponsor, SodaStick.com. Go to SodaStick.com to get your original Minnesota sports inspired goods. If you haven't seen this stuff yet, you got to check it out. One of my favorite designs, and I'll take the graphic off quickly for you, is the Met hat, which I know you love, Pat. Yeah. How good is the Met hat? All of their apparel is screen printed here in Minnesota on super soft, super comfy shirts. You will love it, and we're going to hook you up with 15% off your next order. So use the code KFAN for 15% off. That's SodaStick.com, original Minnesota sports-inspired goods. Use the code KFAN for 15% off your next order. I saw one interesting note, Pat. I read a lot of Michael Russo stuff at The Athletic. I think he's maybe the best beat writer in the country for any sport in any region. We're very lucky. Yeah. We're lucky to have him covering the Minnesota Wild. Yep. And I'll be honest, when it comes to buyouts and some of that contract stuff, I don't ever completely understand that. And we've been wondering about this Parisi stuff and the recapture penalties and what happens if he goes to this franchise. But Russo had an interesting note because
I think I saw it. Go ahead.
Well, because we've wondered what happens if the Wild buy out Parisi, and I've seen the numbers, and you'd get $5 million in cap savings for this year, but then basically the next 3 years are what he's getting paid in salary, and then you got another 4 years of paying $1 million against the cap and then it goes 8 years out. And I've looked at it and go, I would not want to buy Zach Parisi out. I just don't think it makes sense just to get savings for this 1 year.
Right.
But Russo had something that I had never thought of because I didn't even know this was possible, that you could trade Zach Parisi to another team, and then the buyout is far less for that team. Basically, overall, it would be a $7 million buyout, I think, for the course of over 8 seasons. So he made the point of, you could trade Zach Parisi to a team that needs to get to the floor of the salary cap. Let's face it, we've seen it with the Arizona Coyotes forever with all the players, right? And that's the hard part, is you got to find a buyer for this. And I don't know how much you'd have to give up for this, right? Because you need to trade some sort of asset to be able to unload Zach Parisi's contract on another team. But there is a way in which you could trade Zach Parise. Another team then can say, we're going to buy him out.
Yeah.
They don't get nearly severe the cap hit that the Minnesota Wild would get. And then Zach Parise is basically now a free agent, and he can go play wherever he wants. And he can pick his own destination at that point. So like I said, I don't know how many teams out there would be willing to just take on a Zach Parise contract. I also don't know how much the Wild. What do you have to give up to do that? I mean, you're going to have to give up another player. You might have to give up a draft pick. I don't know what that would cost exactly, but I found that to be very interesting.
It's one way of trying to figure out what to do, right? Another option. And I was going to get to the point until you finished. Zach has to agree to a trade, right?
Yep.
I mean, he could say, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck.
Sure.
If he wanted to. Now, I don't think he'd do that because he still wants to play, still thinks he can play at a high level, all that kind of stuff. So, but boy, if they could pull something off like that, I think that would be in the best interest of everybody, because
it'd be a win-win for both sides.
Brandon, going into this year, unless Zach is a top 6 guy,
and he won't be.
And he won't be.
No.
No, he won't be. And that's okay. But if he's not, the whole season, the focus is going to be on him. And why isn't he here? Or you'll have people complaining. You'll have some people saying, yeah, or buy him out. Or, there's going to be
complaining he's not on the power play. Yeah.
All this, that.
It's going to create negative energy.
Yeah. And they've turned it around here in terms of their culture, their belief, their winning. I think, and listen, it might rejuvenate Zach to just go to another team and,
Sure.
ultimately
he was rejuvenated in the playoffs.
Yeah. And ultimately,
he had a little chip on his shoulder.
Yep. And ultimately, when you make a deal, you want to make a deal that's fair for both teams. So I don't think it will be fair on the Wild's part, because they're going to have to give up a lot. And if, they believe, ultimately that's the best thing for their organization, they'll do it.
Nick Bjugstad, 1 year, $900,000 deal. I only bring this up, Pat, because I'm fine with him. I thought he was okay in his role. I think as a 4th line player who can play center, play wing. At times you can move him up in the lineup if need be. I thought he was a fine player. It's a fine signing. I was a little surprised this happened so early. Usually those types of players, those 4th line guys, especially with the Wild's cap situation, they're usually last priority, late in July after free agents are signed and stuff like that. So that part of it caught me off guard a little bit.
It did me a little bit, but then I thought, you know what? Nick Bjugstad probably went to them and said, I want to be here. I want to be in my home state. I love it here. I'll take a deal. And looking at the signing, Brandon, we always look at, well, who's available free agent wise. And those numbers are big numbers. So if you look at the market for guys in his range, I don't know if you're going to find many that are a lot better than him. for a guy under $1 million.
Yeah.
I'm talking, I mean, you're looking at Kyle Rouse, Johnson,
Yeah, you're looking at minor leaguers.
Yeah, you are, right? And so you get
that can play that role.
Yeah, so you get a veteran guy who's willing to play here. And listen, he's, he had back surgery, and he was fine last year, but so I think he understands he's not going to be a 20-minute a guy night. Now, can you plug him in, occasionally there if you have to? Of course. But, I think he's happy to be here. I think he's got a great attitude. He's a really good guy. And I think he'll fit just fine on that bottom line, where he'll probably start.
All right, Pat, we are 9 days away, so maybe we can talk about it for our next week's Beyond the Pod as well. I'm sure we will. The topic of something will probably change by the time we talk. But the expansion draft, the Wild have to have their players submitted by July 17th. So we have 9 days as of this recording on this podcast. If you had to pick right now, assuming Bill Guerin is not, giving up a piece of some sort to protect certain players, if you just had to do the 7-3-1 or the 4-4-1, what style are you picking, and who are you saving? Who are you protecting?
Probably 7-3-1. I would, and that goaltender would be Talbot. I don't think I think there's I looked at the goalie market, and there's going to be a lot of good goaltenders available. And so I don't think Seattle's saying, oh boy, we got to get Kakkonen. So I think he'll be safe, left unprotected. Listen, I think Guerin will try to get a deal done before a player's let go. And so, who are your trade candidates, right? You got Dumba, you got Greenway. I think Carson Soucy is someone that teams might have an interest in. Now, whether they want to deal a Carson Soucy is another matter. I'm circling Greenway. I really am. I think there's more to it. I think he made progress, but I don't know if they see him, and I could be dead wrong, but I don't know if they see him long-term being that guy that's going to get them to where they need to get to. And I think a lot of general managers, always think that, we can change this part of his game or whatever, but I think at some point you are who you are. And I would just keep an eye on that name.
But I mean, if you're doing 7-3-1, you are protecting Jordan Greenway. I mean, you're not exposing him at that point. If you're protecting 7 forwards, he's going to be one of your 7 forwards.
Yes, he will be. Yes.
Let's begin with the goaltending aspect of this, Pat, because probably early in the season when Talbot was hurt and had the COVID thing, and Kakkonen went on a pretty good run there for about 8, 9, 10 games.
Yeah.
I would have told you at that point, well, I'm saving Capo just because he's proving that he's been a pretty good NHL goalie. Obviously, he's young, and these goalies, the way they develop and their trajectory, like there's still a lot of upside there. And obviously, at that point, you have a small cap hit with him. The way Talbot played down the stretch, the way he played in the postseason, and the other part with this, Pat, is he's got a pretty reasonable cap hit, right? I mean, you're getting pretty good value there for a guy who, he ain't in Vasilevsky or Carey Price territory, but he performed like a top 10 goalie this year, borderline top 5 with how well he played, and has a reasonable cap hit. If you were to lose him to Seattle, now all of a sudden, maybe there are people out there that think, hey, Kaapo Kakkonen can be your number 1 goalie next year. I'm not convinced of that.
No.
I still think you'd have to have a timeshare, and you're still going to have to go out and spend money on a goalie that might cost more than Talbot to begin with. So I'm protecting Cam Talbot at this point. I know people have been kind of 50-50 on this, and do I want to lose Kaapo Kakkonen? No. I also wouldn't be devastated if we lost him.
And what I tell you about him a year ago, because I'd seen him play, the 2 previous years quite a bit, and he got tired. And he played those 8 in a row, 9 in a row, and I think that wore him out. I think He is going to get there. I really do, because I heard his comments at the end of last season. He said, "Man, I just can't believe how hard Cam Talbot works. And prepares his body and eats properly and all of that." And Kakkonen is still learning how to do that. As far as a goaltender, he's really good. I mean, he's really good. But like anything else, Brandon, you get tired, you lose it mentally. You're not as sharp, and you don't play as well. That happens with everybody, and so I think he's learning and he's getting better and he's progressing. But I don't think he's a number one yet. And I absolutely think you have to protect Talbot, because, as you mentioned, they'd have to pay a heck of a lot more to get a guy like a Dredger from Florida or somebody like that to be your number one.
I too would go 7-3-1, and basically that means your three defensemen, Suter, Spurgeon, Brodin, are protected, and you'd have to expose Dumba and Soucy. The seven forwards, obviously, Parisi and Zuccarello are required because of big trade moves. But then Eriksson Ek I'm keeping, Fiala I'm keeping, Foligno, Greenway, and then I think it comes down to Hartman or Sturm, actually.
That boy.
Which is a little bit of a decision.
Well, then,
just because of Sturm's age, but Hartman's still pretty young as well, and obviously showed his value.
Got more upside, right?
Sturm might have more upside, but I think Hartman showed a lot of value being able to move into a second line center role halfway through the season.
Yeah,
he's a guy who can go up and down the lineup and played well early in the playoff series.
I want to talk about our D before we move on, or watching the playoffs, right? And we've probably had this conversation before. The size of the D in the playoffs, whether it be, just not so much punishing, but, letting guys know that you're there. It was tough to get to the front of the net for all these teams. And, I really, really believe adding a big body back there or two. Can Soucy be that guy that gets a little bit meaner? Does he have it in his DNA to do that? That's a question mark for me. Good player. Bring him back, that's fine. But, to me, if they're going to get to another level, I think they need to get a little bit bigger back there.
Which is, I agree with, and I would like Soucy to become one of those guys. Bill Guerin, GM of the Wild, agreed with that when we had him on this podcast a couple episodes. But if you look in the pipeline, Pat, in terms of, Kalen Addison's not going to be that guy.
No.
It sounds like, according to Russo, the Wild are interested in signing Brendan Menell. He isn't that guy. He's more of like a Spurgeon almost type of player.
Right.
So in terms of what you got in the minors, and I agree with you, but where are you going to fit that guy? Because unless they're moving multiple defensemen, or to me, Carson, best case scenario, Carson Soucy becomes that guy.
He has to, right?
Suter's kind of your next biggest guy, but he doesn't play that way, and that ain't going to change at this stage of his career.
No, and we had Billy on, and he said, we'd like to add a bigger D back there, just watching the playoffs and so forth and so on. But, you're not going to move Brodin. You can't move Spurgeon. You can't move Suter. So, and then, like you said, if they're, if they have high hopes for Addison and they're going to sign Brendan Menell, I don't know.
Yeah. How are you going to do it?
How are you going to do it?
And it sounds like they want to re-sign Ian Cole. So I just,
but where's the money going to come for Cole?
I'm convinced Matt Dumba's not going to be on this team.
Me too.
Because they have to shed salary somewhere, and there's with all the players we just mentioned at the blue line with Menell and Dumba and
here's the deal,
re-signing not Dumba. I'm sorry, Kalen Addison. I feel like he gets traded or he goes to Seattle.
Right, and we're talking about a team that hasn't, knocked on the door of getting to the Stanley Cup yet.
Yeah. One last topic before we go, Pat. The news came down last night that Vladimir Tarasenko in St. Louis requesting a trade, and that he wants what he's basically lost his trust with the organization and the training staff there after some issues with some shoulder surgeries.
Yeah.
That's an interesting player, and obviously the Wild aren't really going to be in a situation financially, and I think about half the league's not in a situation financially to take on that contract. But that's an interesting situation where a guy who has elite potential, he is getting a little up there in age, but has also had some shoulder issues and some injury issues and hasn't been on the ice. In terms of determining what that value is, there's some risk reward there, but the reward could be very nice if he ends up on a different team.
He will help somebody, no doubt about it. He is an elite player when he's healthy. Someone's going to have to pay to get him, bottom line, because it's got to be salary in, salary out, I would imagine. But there'll be some teams. I mean, he's too good a player. Can you imagine him with McDavid? I mean, there's a good possibility he could end up in Edmonton. I mean, really, he could end up with a team like in Montreal. I mean, Montreal needs more scoring. There's no doubt about it. There's a team that could probably fit him, and to play for a team like the Canadiens. You never know, but there will be a market for Tarasenko.
Pat, appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you next week on Beyond the Pod.
Sounds great, Brandon. Thank you.
All right. He's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. Thank you so much for listening to the Beyond the Pod podcast on the iHeartRadio app and anywhere else you get your podcast. And also for watching on KFN YouTube channel. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.